Understanding second wave feminism. Uh, this lesson comes with a caveat. The caveat is Latin for beware. It's a warning. And the warning with this lesson is to remember that this is Western world only that we're discussing. The Western world would include countries like New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom, United States, Canada. Outside of these countries in the Western world, there's places like Egypt, who had reigning pharaohs that were females, like Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, and famously Cleopatra. There's also countries that inversely have poor female rights, such as a lot of the Middle East today. So just going forward, keep in the back of your mind that this is focused on the Western world only. Right, so we begin by first looking at the first wave of feminism. To understand the second wave, we need to look at the foundations on which the second wave was based. The timeline here covers 72 years and begins in Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, moves through to the 1870s with the 15th Amendment, 1916 with the Planned Parenthood establishment, and 1920 with the 19th Amendment. Although those are all discussing the United States, this is applicable to the rest of the Western world because there was, give or take a few years, a general trend that most countries followed each other's movements. And over the following slides, we'll have a look at these four points in time. So the first one is Susan B. Anthony and the Seneca Convention. So the first wave of feminism before the second wave. The first wave of feminism began in 1848. A convention was held and women discussed their grievances and passed a list of 12 resolutions calling for specific equal rights, including, after much debate, the right to vote. So there wasn't an absolute consensus. It did require some debate for everyone to agree that they deserved the right to vote. Next is the budding feminist movement was at the time tied in with the abolitionist movement. This gave it a very strong momentum at the beginning, with both feminism and abolitionism working together to gain civil rights. The beginnings had the notion of universal suffrage under the guidance of feminists such as Susan B. Anthony. However, this didn't last long, and the movement was hijacked to be a white woman's suffrage. So that means at the beginning, in 1848, it was a universal notion of suffrage, where all women deserved equality. That over time, this came to be focused towards white women, and not just all white women, straight white women. Gay rights did not become an issue inside of the feminism until much, much later in the second wave. The 15th Amendment was passed in 1870 that gave black men the right to vote, and this caused a skyrocket in membership in the white women feminist groups because they thought that if the black man was given the right to have a vote, then this is a bit of a racist point of view, but they believed if they were able, then white women, who at the time were perceived to be more superior, should have been given the right at the same time, if not beforehand. So racism took a major role in the feminist movement when comments such as this were published. If educated women are not as fit to decide who shall be the rulers of this country as field hands, then where's the use of culture, or any brain at all? Implying that field hands, who were previously slaves, most slaves tended to work on plantations. They thought that if they were given the right to vote, then what was the point in white women becoming sophisticated and gaining culture and intelligence if they weren't even as worthy as who were 5 years earlier slaves? Black women were barred from attending most demonstrations. If ever allowed to attend, they were expected to remain at the back of the group. So again, there's that racist notion that the lowest of the lows were the black women. So there was the sexism towards women and the racism towards black people. So the black women caught the brunt of both of those prejudice movements. And pictured here is a 1900s women's suffrage protest with the banner that says New York City women have no vote at all. You can see the white women marching there in the front. Next, we have in 1960, the precursor to Planned Parenthood is opened after a feminist movement had focused some energy on the female's right to control their body and reproductive rights. So it wasn't called Planned Parenthood at the beginning, it was the precursor at this point. And their focus was, again, yes, to control their own bodies and their reproductive rights, which means access to contraception and abortion. In 1920, 4th of June, the 19th Amendment is passed, allowing women the right to vote, so what we call suffrage, the grand achievement of the first wave feminists. For the first wave feminists, this was the greatest thing that they had achieved, and in terms of their goal, this was pretty much their ultimate objective as well. So this is when the wave begins to splinter and lose power and momentum, as groups focus on women's employment rights, reproductive rights, black voting rights, land ownership rights, and education rights. So, as they were previously one central movement, they have now splintered up into several different movements, which makes it harder to have a central focus and a much more powerful hold and influence. So next we look at the timeline for the second wave feminists, which begins in 1963 with the book Feminism. Then there is the Equal Pay Act of 1963. There is Title IX in Roe v. Wade in 72 to 73. And then we have the entire Ronald Reagan presidency from 81 to 89. And we'll look over these four key periods and events over the next few slides. So the second wave beginnings. In 1963, Betty Friedman publishes The Feminine Mystique, selling 3 million copies in 3 years. It becomes a sensation and begins to create some unrest about women's place in society. So 3 million copies in 1963, that is a massive number. And there were plenty of other feminist books that existed before The Feminine Mystique. But what made this one the key event was the number of copies that was sold. Essentially, after sharing it with your friends or your sisters, your cousins, your classmates, your co-workers, one copy could inform multiple women, and this helped create a universal understanding or 0 point in the feminist movement of the second wave. It brought to light the systemic sexism that taught women that their place was in the home, and that if they were unhappy as housewives, it was only because they were broke. This perspective was held prior to the second wave. The idea was they had achieved suffrage, and now they should be happy with their position as the traditional housewife. Not showing satisfaction in the traditional role was not seen as someone who wanted more and wanted to succeed and empower herself. It was actually seen as someone who was damaged and broken and couldn't understand how good they had it at that point in time. So the golden spread of the novel was cemented to move from the political equality that was fought for in the first wave in the second wave to fight for social equality. So that's the one word key difference between first and second wave feminism is that the first wave was a political equality movement, fighting for political equality in terms of their rights to vote. In the second wave, we're looking at our social equality, which covers all facets of social life that women believe they should have had the right to have. Not just women believe, many men, of course, as well. So next up is the legislative success. So here we have a list here of some of the key events that occurred. So in 1963, we had the Equal Pay Act outlawed the pay gap, giving women equal income. 1964, we had Title VII, which was a civil rights and labour law. This outlawed discrimination based on race, sex, religion, or national identity for rights to voting. Next, we had 1972 Title IX, which outlawed discrimination in education, participation based on sex, which was quite a big one actually, because prior to that, schools were predominantly male only. Sometimes there were schools established for females as well, but these were still segregated and separated. So allowing women the right to participate in education was a massive stepping stone. In 1973, we had Roe v. Wade, which was a Supreme Court ruling that the Constitution protects pregnant women's liberty to have abortions. This is in contrast to the 1916 First Wave movement, when we had the established Planned Parenthood business clinics. Now we have a legal precedent allowing for that. Then in 1978, we had Oregon versus Rideout, where marital rape begins to be an outlaw process, as this was an extremely serious problem for women. Essentially, the husband had the power to say when he was provided with sexual relations. And if the woman did not want that, either she was forced to submit or essentially was raped at the time. And the law didn't protect them. Prior to Oregon versus Rideout, it was believed that this was the woman's role in the household to satisfy her husband. Next, we have the propaganda of the secular that destroyed the second wave. You can see here photographed a piece here. This is down with a man, husbands for old maids. All of this at the suffragette meetings, you can hear some plain things and see them too. Clearly, we can see the caricature of the second wave feminists as very ugly, humorless people. So in the 1980s, we saw a rise in conservatism during the Reagan administration's era. Propaganda successfully painted the feminist as a hairy-legged, humorless, ugly lesbian who was bent on ensuring the subservience of men. Notice there the specific use of the word subservience. So it wasn't just the propaganda was a focus that they were fighting for their rights. They were falsely claiming women were fighting for superiority. A New York Times article of interviews mentioned a girl saying, "Look around and you'll see some happy women, and then you'll see all these bitter women." She said, "The unhappy women are all feminists. You'll find very few happy, enthusiastic, relaxed people who are ardent supporters of feminism." Again, promoting this idea that if you weren't happy in your home as your traditional housewife role, you were broken. And by broken in this context, you were unhappy and you were a feminist. As with the first wave, this also caused a schism, the splintering, where we started to look at lesbians' rights, we started looking at civil liberties. So there was a racial divide yet again, and this lost a lot of momentum for the wave, and it eventually dissipated from there. Next, I made a very rudimentary mock-up graph of the amount of women participating in fighting for feminism rights, whether political or social. Now, a very important part of this is there's two important parts of this graph. One is to show you the waves. So we can see here the first wave, and then it simmers down. The second wave simmers down. And the third wave, it simmers down. And we're looking at both of these are argued as the third wave at this point in time. There's no absolute definition just yet. Perhaps in the future, when you all become historians, you'll be able to mark down this as an absolute fact. The important part here is there's never a 0 point reached. There has always been, throughout history, throughout societies, people fighting for feminist rights. There's never been something that has not existed. It's just something that has been fought harder for and achieved more in the Western world during the first and second wave feminist movements. And at the end of the slide here, there is just some links for recommended reading that can help you understand more specifically New Zealand's role in suffrage and women's rights and now feminist movements, as well as there is the bottom link, which offers some more propaganda images. Right, thank you.